Maybe we'll get confirmation of who the other person in FNAF 3 was. It's Michael Afton. But confirmation would be nice so Hudson believers can shut the hell up. No hate, but come on, guys.
Ladies, gentlemen, and those with the good sense to do away with the whole notion, I welcome you to the premier audio medium for all your Fazbear entertainment needs. The Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. Note, FFPP is not responsible for any loss of appetite, disinterest, dismemberment, or other legally classified statuses. So strap in and enjoy.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. I'm your host with the toast, Rytos, here to talk about Five Nights at Freddy's like we always do. We got big news. I'm just going to address it. I'm wearing a blankie. Okay, I bought a cooling blanket because it's hot as hell, and I was like, cooling blankets aren't real. And my wife's mother bought a cooling blanket for their dog, and I was like, this can't be real. And I used it. I was like, oh, holy, it's real. So I bought one, and we all bought one because they work actually really well. So this is a cooling blanket because it's cozy, and it keeps me cool, but it's cozy. But anyway, FNAF news, sir. A second FNAF interview has hit the YouTube. This one was specifically with Evan Lampy, who's the creative director of Secret of the Mimic, and the interview is done by Dawko. The full video is on his channel, and it will be linked in the description, so go and watch the full interview. It's really well done. Dawko, you knocked it out of the park. But we got some very interesting information about Secret of the Mimic that honestly answers all the questions that I had that I wanted answered before playing it, for Secret of the Mimic. I had so many questions going into this that, like, obviously lore questions, but I don't want those answered yet. I want to find them in game. But I had so many logistical questions that finally have been answered in this interview, and I could not be happier with the information we got. So I kind of just wanted to go over the whole interview. At least I wanted to go over the major points that I think are really important. And obviously, like I said, go watch the full interview because I will not be covering everything that's in that video. To make sure, you should go watch the full interview. Anyway, one of the first and foremost things that everyone's been confused and asking questions about that we finally have a direct answer for, and that is that the VR version of the game is actually being delayed because the at-launch version of the game is flat mode only. And honestly, I think this is the best outcome. I guess arguably the best outcome is VR and flat mode releasing at the same time, but the worst case scenario that I feared was VR would be the only release version on launch, like it was with Help Wanted 2. Now, Help Wanted 2 was planned as a VR game, but as we learned in this interview, Secret of the Mimic was conceptualized as a VR game. But I think they kind of learned their lesson from how Help Wanted 2 was received, because he even admits in the interview that it was most important to have flat mode ready at launch, because so many people are only going to play it in that version of it. You know, only a smaller percentage of people who play video games have a VR headset. So if you launch it in VR only, you're excluding the majority of players who want to play your game. And then after a few months go past, half of them have watched the game and they're not going to buy it. So launching it without VR and focusing on that like flat version of the game is the most important thing. And they admit that in the interview, which is huge that they know and understand this, that like they delayed the VR specifically to focus and hone in the flat version of the game to have that as ready as it can be for launch, which is huge news. And I wanted to get that right up front because I think that is one of the biggest questions people had is like, can I play this game day one? And the answer is, if you have a PC, yes. And probably a PS5 or PS4. I don't remember if it's on both, but at least if you have a PC, yes. The next questions I think were really important were the size of the game. That's like the length of it, how big the scope of it is. This has been one of my most worried questions is like, look, I cover Five Nights at Freddy's as a job. Not every game needs to be this colossal behemoth for FNAF to be successful. That's not true. But for my channel to be healthy, I need a lot of content. And I was really worried, you know, because there's two roads for this. Secret of the Mimic could have been another Ruin, aka a really good, like, 5-hour experience, you know? And if that was the case, I would be in trouble. And there's a possibility that it's Help Wanted, where it's 6 to 8 hours, but it's a bit more straightforward, so there's not as much to talk about. But we got some clear and concise information from the developer, from the creative director of this game and its length, at least estimates, right? Like, we won't know how long the game is until a bunch of people play it and we can take averages. But the estimates we got were that the main story of this game takes about 8 to 10 hours to complete. And if you're going for a more completionist run and trying to see and do everything, that's closer to a 15 to 20 hour playthrough. Now, this, on the surface is like only 15 to 20 hours for 100%. Keep in mind, Security Breach, according to How Long to Beat, takes 10 hours for the main story and 25 hours for a 100% run. And remember, Security Breach's runtime is mostly comprised of running through giant hallways, right? Like, the majority of the playthrough of Security Breach is just running from A to B because it's such a big game. So the fact that Secret of the Mimic is maybe a few hours shy of Security Breach is exactly it's more than I could have hoped for. Because I've been saying I don't expect a second Security Breach. That game is massive. Frankly, as they admit in the interview, a bit too big, right? One of the biggest issues with Security Breach is it's so wide and open that there's not many good moments for horror. It's more of just, I gotta run through the atrium again, So having a game with apparently about 80 to 100% of the time spent in game that it was Security Breach is huge, because that means there's so much room for just additional stuff, And a big part about this Secret of the Mimic game, as we learned in this interview, is that it's a very claustrophobic experience. For reference, he laid out that out of curiosity, he put the entire layout, he put the layout of the map in the Security Breach map just to compare sizes, and apparently the perimeter of the entire building fits within Roxy Raceway. And at first you're like, oh my god, that's so small. But he explains that there are not only several stories of the building that we have to consider here, but the game is much, much more compact and dense, where there are tight hallways, secret passages, several rooms in that area, and I think this is what a lot of people were hoping for, right? Ruin showed us that Steel Wool really knocks it out of the park with smaller, more contained areas. And I think that's just true of horror in general. Claustrophobia is a huge driver for horror. Not necessarily like trapping you in a small box that you can't get out of, but being closed in, having to turn around frequent corners, not getting a good sense of everything around you. That is where a lot of horror drives. I mean, it's why It Steals is such a powerful game. That's actually that's the game that Postra's video on It Steals was the first time I heard about Postra, and it made me play the game. And It Steals is one of the few horror games I've ever played to make me actually legitimately scream. I will see if I can find that clip, but that's like a 4 or 5 year old stream at this point, He's gonna get pissed. He's pissed. That was a genuine scream. He's so fast. Okay. And It Steals, not a super graphically impressive game, not as, the horror is very basic, it's just done excellently. And a big part of that is the claustrophobia it makes you feel. So, Secret of the Mimic chasing that claustrophobia, I think, is a huge play to its strength. The developer also went on to describe the game as similar in tone, at least in darkness, to Ruin, which is good because Ruin was pretty intense, it was, I wouldn't say it was drastically terrifying or anything, but especially compared to Security Breach and Help Wanted, Ruin was upping the ante of horror in this franchise and had a lot of really good horror moments. And just looking at the trailer of Secret of the Mimic, the trailer alone is scarier than the majority of Security Breach. But they did say, and this is hugely important, it's much less linear than Ruin, which was one of the main criticisms of Ruin, and is a completely valid criticism of Ruin, is that as much as I love the game, it is very linear. It is kind of just walking down hallways and doing stuff in those hallways, and then you get to the end of the game, right? Not every game needs to be open world. Platformers are allowed and should be linear. But at the same time, with a horror game like this, the linearity does weigh down the replayability, right? And that is something that drags on Ruin, that once you've collected everything, there's really not a reason to replay the game. You're going to get the same exact experience every time. Whereas apparently this is a lot less linear. A few times, Evan describes the game as this, like, he uses this gesture of, like, the main story, right? That 8 to 10 hour playthrough is this veneer on top, this straightforward, like, yes, there's like a moderate challenge. It's also apparently pretty understandable to most players, especially new players, this main story. Like, you can follow along what's going on without having to be a super fan, but there's so much underneath is what's been described. And that's that extra 5 to 10 hours is this underneath sections. And apparently the deeper you go, the harder it gets, the more intense the lore is. And I'm hoping that's accurate, right? I'm hoping he's not just hyping himself up, because Security Breach could be similarly described as a main story that is understandable to all players, but there's a deeper lore-filled story underneath. And at the same time, while that's true, what it boils down to is that the main story of Security Breach is this. Like, this is the main story of Security Breach. And then if you do 3 extra objectives, you get most of the other endings. And if you do the other half of the main story you didn't previously, you get a secret boss fight. And that's it, right? Like, Security Breach is intellectually compelling, not because it has so many, like, deeper and different routes throughout it. Security Breach is intellectually stimulating because it's filled to the brim with nonsensical information. And that's partly because of how big the map is. They just needed to put stuff there. But a lot of it is just floor and repeated arcade machines. So ideally, like, my ideal version of this game, and it sounds like this is what they're shooting for, is the game is just as long, but way more compact and just dense, right? Instead of, like, for example, the rehearsal room in Security Breach. I'm sure some of you probably forgot about it. It's right outside Rockstar Row. It's got these risers like you would see in a high school choir room. And I assume this is where they, like, would rehearse songs or something. But this is a massive room. You enter one time, and there's, like, 2 hidden things and a 1/3 of the puzzle for the daycare loft, right? This is awesome. This could have been a closet. Right, you can have that cardboard cutout, something else, and, like, it didn't need to be this massive empty room. That's the point. So I'm hoping that, and it's, like I said, it seems like that's what they're describing, that Secret of the Mimic is a lot more compact, and its lore is denser. So you're not running these long stretches with nothing in between. You're constantly keeping an eye out for the Mimic while sneaking through hallways, which just sounds more compelling. And as a final note in this section, the game itself has been in concept and tossed around as a background project since as far back as 2022. But it has been full-on, hands-on deck, all-in development since for about 18 months. They said about once Help Wanted 2 was out, everyone was focused on Secret of the Mimic. Whereas, like, before then, it was kind of like, oh, we'll draft up some ideas, maybe have somebody do some concept art. It was full-on development after Help Wanted 2. That's all they've been working on since Help Wanted 2. So, and that seems like a good amount of development time, right? Like, 18 months of full studio, hands-on-deck development, and a couple extra years of just, like, looking at it and kicking it around. And that's kind of the size and development side of things. But we got some information on the story, too. And this is mainly where this week's video is going to come in. I don't know exactly what I'm going to write about and, like, theorize about. But I'm definitely going to recap this mainly for this week's video. That's the story hints that we got throughout it. Like I mentioned, it's the best of both worlds, where the main story of the game is approachable and understandable to new and old fans alike, but it's the deeper levels that are a bit more he, like, points out, like, that's for the FNAF fans. This is made for the FNAF fans. And when I hear that, I'm relieved, because one of my biggest fears was this would be another Help Wanted 2 situation, where the main story is pretty understandable immediately, and there isn't much deeper going on. Where, like, the only real confusing parts of Help Wanted 2 are the endings, and even then, there's pretty easy to get to interpretations of them. So I think that's part of the reason why there wasn't a lot of hubbub of Help Wanted 2, 2 months after, where, like, it's not brought up as often as even Help Wanted 1 is. And I think it's because of a lack of interesting details that we have no explanations for. And this was my biggest ask the long time. I kept saying this. I just need them to put some weird, unexplainable shit in this game. I need a bunch of stuff that doesn't make any sense on your 4th playthrough, because that's where theorizing thrives, right? That's when you get these disparate pieces and you start putting them together. And hopefully a lot of that has to do with the early timeline and then some stuff later on, because the early timeline is where a lot of timelines end up faltering because we just have a lack of info. That being said, this isn't a Fazbear facility. Like, he did confirm that. We had a feeling, right? The trailer says we've contracted Edwin Murray or something like that. So we had a feeling that this was just a contracted worker and not a Fazbear facility. But there was always a possibility that while Edwin was contracted, he worked at a Fazbear facility. But it was pretty confirmed that, like, this is not a Fazbear facility. It's connected to FNAF very heavily, and there are connections throughout the game. Like I said, he said this is made for FNAF fans. It's very connected. However, this is a contracted worker, which means there's a lot of non-FNAF or non-Fazbear entertainment properties within this warehouse. And that's awesome. You know, that gives us a lot of stuff to work with, and it gives us that slight ambiguity of, like, what was absorbed by Fazbear and what wasn't. As far as for, like, the core of this game, it was also, while I'm talking about confirmations, he did confirm that it's in the 70s, you know, so that idea that maybe this is taking place long after the fact, or, you know, maybe, it doesn't necessarily deconfirm this. There has been a theory that the gameplay of Secret of the Mimic is like, being watched by someone else on recorded tapes, because the main trailer and the teaser are both on, like, a film reel. So there's been the theory that, like, this film, like, we're playing a game, but the gameplay is being watched on a film reel by someone else. And that is possible. He's not deconfirming that, but it seems to at least be confirming that this main gameplay took place in the 70s, whether or not it's being watched after the fact on a film reel. We also got some information on how the game story was concepted. It's, you know, he's described it as, like, a co-creating it with Scott. Scott is the head of the pyramid. What he says goes. He's the main driver, but everyone else helps to add ideas to that and help flesh it out. Which I think is the healthiest way to do this. It seems a lot healthier than Security Breach, which they did, like Scott admitted, he learned his lesson. He cannot not tell the story to the people making the game. So it seems like it's much more created in tandem now, which is huge to know. Hopefully that means the story is a lot more cohesive this time. Because this is, like, admittedly, Secret of the Mimic is the first, like, full game being made since Security Breach that is separate from Security Breach, right? Like, Ruin and Help Wanted 2 kind of had to work on their back foot to make up for what happened with Security Breach's story, whereas Secret of the Mimic is separate. You know, this is going to be the real showing of what Steelwool and Scott can do when really teamed up and making a full game. So I'm excited to see that, especially since since it seems like Scott has told the story to the people making the game, you know. And speaking of creating it, as far as, like, the tone, apparently Scott sent some key art to Steelwool made by an artist he contracted of, like, here's some of the characters, like the mushroom and the elephant, some hallway shots, like, this is the vibe we're going for. And then Steelwool pretty much turned to their character art team and said, like, all right, make a warehouse full of costumes. Go crazy. And with that, there's apparently a lot more characters we have not seen, which makes sense, right? Like, we've seen, I think I counted like 20 to 30 characters so far. Like, we've seen a lot of characters, but according to Evan, there are a lot more we have yet to see, which makes total sense, right? Like, it is a costume factory. And I think the fun thing is going to be trying to figure out which ones are fully Murray and which ones were later absorbed by Fazbear. We also know that this story was drafted, back in 2022 in those early years, and he pointed out it was being released, or this was being like created as the Tales from the Pizzaplex books were being released. So it was kind of being made at the same time. And he pointed out specifically it was interesting working in a dual medium, like working in two mediums at the same time. And specifically, I think the quote was, if you've read the books, you don't know the full story. So I'm curious on how this is meant to be taken. I think it is important to note he didn't directly say either or not this game is directly based off of the books or this game is swaying away from the books. He did not directly say that. I think with the words he said, it is being implied that like the books, like I've been saying, the books are more true than they are not, if not just fully in. I would argue, like how I've been recently, that just I think the safest bet. Obviously, do whatever you want. I do think, especially with everything that's come out, the safest bet going into Secret of the Mimic is just assume Tales from the Pizzaplex do be true and accurate. And if something from the games goes against the books, don't fully throw out the books. Just count that as like, oh, okay, this is different in the games. Kind of like we've always done with these books, where we take the books as literally as we can, and when something in the games contradicts it, strike that part out, So I think a similar thing is going to be happening here, where we can assume Tales from the Pizzaplex is true, and if something in the game is directly different than the books, trust the game first, but don't throw out the rest of the books. We did also get 2 posters. If I remember to put them in, I'll put them in right here. These definitely seem to tease more gameplay things than story things. He pointed out the data diver is built in a similar, it looks very similar to a Faz wrench, and that's not an accident. So I think that again leans to how much did Fazbear take from Edwin, assuming since this data diver is used in the factory, it's probably something Edwin made, along with Helpy for that matter. And it's been pointed out by a few people. I know Underscore been pointed out on Twitter. A few people have been pointing out that way back when Steel Wool was doing Guess the Sketch, some of the sketches they were doing were the keys from Resident Evil. Once you know it, some of those keys look a lot similar to this keychain. So it seems like all these Guess the Sketches were linked to something, if not immediately Ruin. And I've been a proponent for that for a while. I still got called crazy for when I said the Andre the Giant and Metal Sonic Guess the Sketch was the Mimic. Because my theory was that, right, Metal Sonic is a robot made to mimic Sonic, literally the Mimic. But Andre the Giant, I argued, it is Andre the Giant, right, or is it somebody else? It is Andre the Giant. Okay. Andre the Giant, I argued, and people disputed this, which is fair, but I always argued that Andre the Giant, at least in the current generation of people, know him first for Princess Bride, right? In the current generation of I would say the 16 to 24-year-old range would know Andre the Giant first and foremost from Princess Bride rather than a wrestler. That was my argument. And it's noteworthy that The Princess Bride came out in 1987. So I was wondering if this was linking the Mimic to 1987 in some way. And that's still maybe not, but it is still noteworthy that more and more these Guess the Sketches were direct references to something that was coming down the line. Oh, and this other poster was the Where Do You Belong with basic, security, repair, creator, admin, and executive. Notably, the executive being that symbol we see all over the manor. Again, MCM being Murray's costume manor. Your data diver knows. I don't remember if they said exactly what this means, but it seems like this is a gameplay thing. This would probably be, your security key card level in a sense. You start with basic, eventually you upgrade your data driver to security, which grants you more access until eventually you get that executive. I wouldn't even doubt if creator is all you need for the main story, and then admin and executive are more secret lore stuff you can find down the line. I think that's totally possible. And then the only other noteworthy thing I want to mention here, again, watch the full interview, it's in the description, is that near the end of the video, Evan said something along the lines of keep an eye out on our socials after the interview because they're going to be posting some more teasers. But it has been a day and we haven't seen that. I assume it was less of a, like, checked right after the interview and you'll find something, and more, we're going to be posting teasers up until the release of Secret of the Mimic, which, like, I hope so. And I think that lines up with the fact that we got a hashtag Mimic Monday post last week. So they're probably going to keep that up and post, increasingly interesting teasers up until the Monday before release. So, it's a release is Friday the 13th. So it's probably the Monday before that Friday the 13th is when they're going to release, like, the biggest teaser or the final teaser. And yeah, that was the interview. Again, amazing interview by Dawko. You did a great job. And I thank Evan Lampy for, giving the community these answers. Because like I said at the beginning, we didn't need, and they didn't give lore answers or like, what's the story going to be about? We can play the game for that. This was a lot of tactile information. This was a lot of, business information, which is super, super good to know, especially for the consumer, especially for content creators banking their summer off of this, me included. So having these, like, tangible answers of, like, oh yeah, the game's about 8 to 10 hours, 15 to 20 for 100%. That's super important to know. The game's launching flat mode. That's super important. It's that stuff more than anything in this interview. I'm like, thank God we have clear and direct answers about this. And again, those were also estimates. He pointed out that the regular sauce is about 6 hours through his playthrough, and he said he's about halfway. So that would be 12, So these are still estimate numbers. We'll need to wait for a bunch of people to play it and compare to really know. I do know I'm going to have my work cut out for me. I hope they release it early on Friday so I can at least beat it fully on Friday. We'll see if I can, because I'm going to need to make a video by Saturday, Sunday, the latest about it, So I guess we'll move on to questions, because I don't really know what else to say about this interview. But if you have a question you want answered on the podcast, feel free to send it into Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. That link is in the description below if you want to copy and paste it, because it's a pain to type out. But before we get to questions, I'm a little tired because it's almost 1 a.m. while I'm recording. Luckily, I've got some Gamersupps, which has energy in it. Well, if you want it. They have caffeine and non-caffeine versions. They taste really good. I like them, and I'm partnered with them. You can use code RYTOS for 10% off your whole order. I like, it's good stuff. Our first question comes from Eric, they, them. So your last video about the Mimic mimicking William Afton also got me thinking about how all but one of William's depictions has a hunched neck, including later that night, which is why I thought the debate was weird, and the Mimic's design in Ruin has a slight hunch. Do you think this design was intentional? I had to look into this because I was like, what are you talking about? But yeah, looking into it, the head is usually a little hunched over. And the Mimic does have that slight hunch to him as well. I wonder how much of that design is like it's literally hunched over, or how much of that is it's running through a small cave system and it's really tall. That is something, because we've only seen it for like 10 seconds in game, and then the other part of that is it intentional? Possibly. It could also be Scott's artistic shorthand. Something you have to keep in mind with a lot of games like this, especially when trying to link disparate characters, is there is character design shorthand. Things that you put in a character design to quickly explain something visually to an audience without having to out loud say it. And a hunched over back, like a slight hunch, is often shorthand for a shady individual. Another example of this, for just a general example, think about Scar from The Lion King. I don't have to say Scar is the villain. You look at Scar's character design and you're like, oh, that's a villain character design. And it's the shorthand they use. It's the fact that he's a bit lankier, a bit scrawnier. He has this crooked smile to him. He's often in shadows, and that's the shorthand of like, oh, this is the villain. He is evil, right? So I think that hunched overness, while it could be a connection to the Mimic mimicking William Afton, it could also be just Scott, like, he tends to have his villains slightly hunched over because they're a little shady. It could go either way. I think that is decent I've said this a lot on this channel, especially on this podcast, talking about evidence submissions. I think that's good supporting evidence. I wouldn't base a theory on it. I think that's where I land on that. But thank you for your question, Eric. We actually have 2 questions from Shannon because I thought they were both very interesting. Our first question from Shannon, her, is, in the Secret of the Mimic trailer and gameplay screenshots, we see Jackie getting more and more deteriorated. This deterioration, though possibly caused by gameplay actions, seems to be happening at an accelerated rate, very similar to the animatronics in Security Breach. If we believe the same thing that's happening to them is happening to Jackie, does this mean that Jackie is infected with the Mimic 1 program, or is Jackie being affected by agony, possibly from David's death or Edwin's grief? Thank you for your question. It's something that I hadn't really thought of because I hadn't noticed it, but I went and looked into it, and you're right. Jackie is deteriorating throughout the game. I think part of it definitely is what you mentioned, and that's just gameplay actions. We know at least that Jackie loses her legs from gameplay actions. That Jackie the Mimic goes to chase you as Jackie and has to rip her upper body out of the box to come after you. That being said, it could be a 50-50. We know Jackie seems to be kind of like the travel workhorse. It's something the Mimic uses to get around the building very easily. So maybe that overuse is causing this deterioration on Jackie. But it is noteworthy that like the eyeballs get this like deep black pitch to them, which does feel pretty agony-centric. The Mimic is something filled with agony. We know that for a fact. Like, David's death, or if David possessed it, depending on what you believe or not, Edwin beat the hell out of it, infusing it with agony. We know that is a fact. So if the Mimic is continually using Jackie's suit, agony could begin to seep into Jackie and eventually deteriorate it. So I think all of these are super possible. We would obviously have to wait for the full game to see if this is a thing or means anything. I will say Jackie doesn't ever, at least I haven't seen a screenshot or trailer where Jackie looks as deteriorated as like end of Security Breach Glamrock Freddy, where he's like falling apart even though he shouldn't be. And that's definitely that like something's infecting you. So we'll see if Jackie gets that far. I think it could so far be excused by just wear and tear. I think it's totally possible. But thank you for your first question. Moving on to your second question. What Fazbear characters, animatronics, and or tech do you think are really Edwin originals? If Edwin was a contractor already working with Fazbear and he suddenly disappeared, is it really much of a stretch to believe that Fazbear just took all of his inventions and changed them enough so people wouldn't notice? This can include characters like Music Man, Helpy, the Mediocre Melodies, Monty, Eclipse, or even the masks you mentioned in your recent theory. It can even extend to automation animatronics and tech like the Fazwrench or the Mailbot, and trash in the gang turning into staff bots and wet floor bots. Curious to know what you think because I have a feeling that Secret of the Mimic is going to show us that a lot of Fazbear properties are stolen ideas. This, I wanted to include this because I want to just say, yeah, probably. Like, it really seems like that. If Edwin is just contracted, and this is not a Fazbear facility, then Fazbear got a lot of questions to answer with the fact that, like you've mentioned, Music Man, alligators that could have eventually turned into Monty, the Fazwrench, Helpy, all of these things are not just things made by Edwin, but things used to function and move about Edwin's factory. On one hand, you could argue, like, if Edwin made anything for Fazbear and they were contracted by Fazbear, that's one thing. And if he was contracted by Fazbear to make the Mimic in the game timeline, then that's fine. That's like, okay, Fazbear contracted him to make it and they bought it, and that's not a stolen idea. They just contracted him to do this. You could argue maybe Music Man's included in that. You could argue that anything he made for Fazbear is included in that. But things like the Fazwrench and Helpy that power his restaurant, that power his factory, why would he power his factory with Fazbear technology if he's not a Fazbear facility? I think very clearly the Fazwrench and Helpy are things that were stolen by Fazbear, unless they provided all of it to Edwin, but why would they do that? So I like you said, I would not doubt if as we play this game, we find more and more things like, oh, Fazbear took this from Edwin. Fazbear took this from Edwin. I think Fazbear saw a perfect opportunity. I think Fazbear has always been a shady company, and they contracted a guy to make something for them, and he went MIA. So they found a legal loophole to be like, oh, well, we can just collect all the stuff he was working on for us then. And since he's not here anymore, possibly dead, possibly missing, who knows, The only person who could be like, oh, yes, this was made for Fazbear and this wasn't, is Fazbear Entertainment and Edwin. And if Edwin isn't there to vouch for himself, legally, I'm pretty sure Fazbear could just be like, oh yeah, this is all stuff we contracted him to make. This is our property now, we're collecting it. Who's gonna dispute that, you know? Yeah, I didn't have much to add to this besides just like, yeah, probably. I think so. So again, thank you for your questions, Shannon. I don't often do 2 in 1, but I saw these back to back and I'm like, yeah, no, these, I want to talk about both of these. And our last question comes from Wednesday, they. I've been a long-term Dead by Daylight and FNAF enjoyer 2018 and 2015 respectively, and I'm wondering what you think the lore might entail within Dead by Daylight. Due to the new quest system, they're unsure how they want to do lore, so the current tome/rift has none. And for those who don't know, all chapters in Dead by Daylight have lore up till they are taken by the entity. For example, FNAF 3 events, and then the entity shows up. Thank you for your question, Wednesday. And yeah, I think that's the thing I'm most excited for. Because like when we're talking about what lore we could get from Dead by Daylight about FNAF, I don't think it's going to be anything groundbreaking. But the way Dead by Daylight works is you get a little tight paragraph about what the character was doing until the entity just kind of shows up and yoinks them. And because of that, by default, that means we are going to get from Scott, or at least from the writers consulting Scott, a paragraph directly telling us what Springtrap was doing. And that's huge. Even if it's just wandering the halls of FNAF 3, maybe we'll get a little bit of his perspective. Maybe we'll get confirmation of who the other person in FNAF 3 was. It's Michael Afton. But confirmation would be nice so Hudson believers can shut the hell up. No hate, but come on, guys. Because my biggest hope before we got the reveal at the Dead by Daylight live stream was a canon model for Michael Afton, and that's dead in the water. We're just getting the killer. On the bright side, we're technically getting both killers that people wanted, because we're getting FNAF 3 Springtrap and movie The Yellow Rabbit, which is huge that we're getting both, especially because they're both voiced by their voices. They got Matthew Lillard for the movie version, and they got PJ Haywood for FNAF 3. We are eating so good. And the map is like FNAF 1 blended with the movie, and it looks so good. So I think the lore to look out for in the Dead by Daylight chapter, like you said, is going to be that lead-up paragraph that we get, and any tidbits we might find in the restaurant, like kids' drawings, any pieces of paper that are left around. We might get some lore with that. So I'm really hopeful for that. But on the bright side, we're going to have an amazing model to use for renders for videos moving forward. So I cannot wait for that. But yeah, thank you for your question. And again, if you want your questions answered on the podcast, feel free to send them into Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. That is in the description to copy and paste because it's pain to type out. But until next time, as always, you've been watching the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast, where the pizza abilities are endless. We hope to enjoy your future patronage. Bye-bye for now.